The impossible student. The transport pod's doors hissed open with mechanical precision, releasing a cloud of recycled atmosphere into the pristine corridors of Stellar Mind Academy. Zara Mitchell stepped out, her worn canvas backpack looking completely out of place among the floating luggage systems and crystalline storage units that surrounded her. The 17-year-old human girl took a deep breath and immediately regretted it. The air tasted metallic, processed through systems designed for beings who breathe methane, hydrogen, and substances she couldn't even pronounce. Director Cathfar watched from his observation deck, all 6 of his articulated arms folded in what his species considered deep contemplation. The spider-like alien's compound eyes tracked every movement as Zara navigated the arrival chamber. She moved differently than the other students, where the ethereal collective beings floated with purposeful grace, and the Drakon warriors strode with military precision. This human simply walked. Her feet touched the ground with each step, creating small vibrations that Cathfar's sensitive limbs could detect even from 3 levels above. "Director, the human has arrived," announced his assistant, a geometric creature made entirely of shifting mathematical equations. "Shall I initiate the standard intellectual assessment protocol?" Cathfar's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "Yes, but record everything. The Council of Minds is watching this experiment very closely. If humans prove intellectually insufficient for advanced galactic education, this will be both the first and last exchange student from Earth." 3 hours later, Zara found herself completely lost in the Academy's impossible architecture. The building seemed to shift and change based on some logic she couldn't understand. Corridors that had been straight when she entered them now curved in directions that hurt her brain to contemplate. She passed classroom windows that revealed lessons being taught in languages that existed as colors, mathematics written in musical notes, and physics demonstrations that made reality bend in ways that violated every law she had learned on Earth. "Lost already, primitive." The voice came from above her head. Zora looked up to see a reptilian student hanging from what she had assumed was a decorative ceiling fixture. His scales were deep green with gold markings that seemed to shift in the light. 2 other students floated nearby, watching her with expressions that needed no translation. "I'm Zora," she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. The 3 aliens stared at her outstretched arm as if she had just grown a second head. "I'm looking for advanced quantum mathematics with Professor Quantus." The reptilian dropped from the ceiling with surprising grace. He stood at least 2 feet taller than Zora, his body built for combat in ways that made her instinctively step back. "I am Jorik of the Drakon Imperium. This is Wisp of the Ethereal Collective, and Nexus of the Data Streams. We know who you are, human." The entire Academy has been discussing the Council's decision to admit a member of such a young species. Wisp, who appeared to be made of shifting aurora lights, pulsed with what Zara hoped was amusement rather than hostility. "Your species has only recently discovered fire in galactic terms. The mathematics you're about to attempt has been perfected for millennia before your sun began to burn." "Well," Zara said, adjusting her backpack straps, "I guess I'll just have to do my best." The advanced quantum mathematics classroom was a sphere suspended in the center of a larger chamber. Students entered through dimensional portals that appeared and disappeared based on their individual thought patterns. Zara spent 10 minutes walking around the outside of the sphere before Professor Quantus took pity on her and opened a simple door. Professor Quantus stood 8 feet tall on 6 segmented legs, his insectoid body covered in chitin that reflected the classroom's holographic displays. His compound eyes tracked every student simultaneously, while his mandibles translated thoughts into 17 different forms of communication. When he spoke, his words bypassed Zora's ears entirely and appeared directly in her consciousness. "Today we explore the mathematical foundations of reality manipulation," Professor Quantus announced. "The equations that govern how consciousness interacts with quantum probability matrices. Student Jorik, please demonstrate the basic harmonic resonance calculation." Jorik moved to the center of the sphere. Mathematics erupted around him in 3-dimensional glory, symbols and numbers cascading through the air in patterns that hurt Zora's eyes to follow. The equations described how thought could influence reality at the quantum level, how consciousness could collapse probability waves into specific outcomes. Within moments, Jorik had created a small star in his palm, its nuclear fusion contained by pure mathematical will. "Excellent," Professor Qantas said. "Student Whis, show us advanced temporal displacement theory." Wis's aurora-like form expanded, filling half the classroom with shifting mathematical concepts that existed in 4 dimensions simultaneously. Zara watched as the energy being manipulated time itself, creating a small bubble where cause and effect operated backwards. Inside the bubble, water flowed upward, and broken objects reassembled themselves. And now, Professor Qantas turned his compound gaze on Zara. "Our human exchange student will demonstrate her species' contribution to advanced mathematics." The classroom fell silent. Every alien eye, sensor, and consciousness field focused on Zara as she walked to the center of the sphere. The mathematical interface recognized her presence and activated, surrounding her with holographic displays that awaited her input. Zara stared at the symbols floating around her. They meant nothing. The mathematical language that every other species seemed to understand intuitively was completely foreign to her human mind. She recognized some basic algebraic concepts, but the advanced quantum mathematics might as well have been written in ancient hieroglyphs. "I don't understand any of this," she said quietly. The silence stretched longer. Several students exchanged glances that clearly communicated their thoughts about human intelligence. Professor Qantas's mandibles clicked in what might have been disappointment or frustration. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "you could show us how humans approach mathematical problems. Your species must have some method of understanding numerical relationships." Zora thought about her high school math classes back on Earth. She remembered struggling with calculus, working through problems step by step, using intuition and trial and error when the formal methods failed her. None of that seemed relevant here, surrounded by beings who could manipulate reality with pure mathematical thought. "We use tools," she said finally. "We write things down. We draw pictures to help us understand. We make mistakes and learn from them." The classroom erupted in chittering, pulsing, and harmonious sounds that Zara realized was alien laughter. She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. Tools. Nexus, the geometric data being, projected equations that spelled out his amusement. "Your species requires external devices to process basic numerical concepts." "Primitive indeed," Jorik added, his scales shifting to colors that Zara suspected were not complementary. Professor Qantas raised several arms for silence. "While the human approach is unconventional, we must remember that diversity of thought has occasionally produced unexpected insights. Student Zara, please demonstrate your tool-based mathematical method." Zara pulled out a pencil and a sheet of paper from her backpack. The sight of these primitive implements caused another wave of alien amusement. She ignored the reactions and began to work, not on the quantum mathematics that surrounded her, but on a simple problem that had been bothering her since she arrived at the academy. She drew the academy's layout as she understood it, sketching the corridors that changed direction and the rooms that seemed to exist in impossible spaces. She marked her path from the transport bay to this classroom, noting where the architecture had shifted. Then she began to calculate, using basic Earth geometry and physics, trying to understand how the building could function. As she worked, something strange happened. The holographic mathematical interface began to respond to her drawings. The simple geometric shapes she sketched started to interact with the Academy's advanced systems. Her basic calculations triggered responses in quantum fields that she didn't even know existed. "Impossible," Professor Qantas whispered, all 6 arms suddenly motionless. "The human is accessing foundational reality matrices through pure intuitive reasoning." On her paper, Zora had drawn what she thought was a simple map. But her human brain had unconsciously recognized patterns that the Academy's designers had built into the structure. Her basic geometry was interacting with advanced spatial manipulation systems, creating a cascade effect through the building's quantum architecture. Alarms began to sound throughout the academy. The classroom sphere shuddered as Zora's simple calculations somehow interfaced with the station's core systems. Through the transparent walls, they could see other classrooms experiencing dimensional fluctuations. Gravity shifted, time dilated, and several advanced physics experiments began producing unexpected results. Director Kethvar's voice echoed through the Academy's communication systems. All students to emergency stations. We have an uncontrolled interaction with the quantum foundation matrix. This is not a drill. Professor Quantus stared at Zora's sheet of paper as if it contained the secrets of the universe. Student Zora, he said slowly, I believe you have just accomplished something that our greatest mathematicians have been attempting for centuries. You have intuitively accessed the Academy's core reality engine. Zora looked at her simple sketch, then at the chaos erupting around them. I was just trying to figure out how to get to the cafeteria, she said. The admission caused another moment of stunned silence, broken only by the continuing alarms and the sound of the Academy's emergency systems trying to compensate for the reality fluctuations that Zora's innocent map-making had triggered. As emergency crews rushed to stabilize the quantum matrices and restore normal space-time to the affected areas, one thing became clear to everyone present. The human exchange student was going to be far more interesting than anyone had anticipated. Whether that was good or bad remained to be seen. In his observation deck, Director Kethvar watched the controlled chaos with growing fascination. Perhaps the Council of Minds had been right to approve this experiment. If a human could accidentally access their most advanced systems with nothing but primitive tools and intuitive thinking, what might they accomplish if they actually understood what they were doing? The first day of Zora's education at Stellar Mind Academy was far from over, and already nothing would ever be the same. Breaking the system. 3 weeks after the reality map incident, as it had come to be known throughout Stellar Mind Academy, Zora had settled into a routine that baffled her alien classmates. Every morning, she would sit in the Academy's central plaza with her primitive paper notebooks, sketching and calculating while the other students floated, phased, or mathematically manifested their way to classes. The Academy's AI system, known as the Eternal Mind, had been malfunctioning since Zora's arrival. Not catastrophically, but in ways that the Academy's greatest technical minds couldn't understand or repair. Systems would respond to requests they hadn't received. Computational matrices would solve problems that hadn't been input. The cafeteria began serving foods that nobody had programmed into its molecular assemblers, but that somehow perfectly suited each student's nutritional and cultural preferences. Director Kethvar called his 7th emergency faculty meeting in as many days. The conference room hummed with tension as professors from 17 different species tried to make sense of their deteriorating technological infrastructure. The Eternal Mind has been the Academy's core intelligence for 3,000 years, Professor Quantus reported, his compound eyes displaying data streams that hurt to look at. Its quantum consciousness has guided every aspect of our educational mission. Now it appears to be improvising. Improvising is a generous term, interjected Dr. Helix, a crystalline being whose body resonated with mathematical frequencies. Yesterday it refused to calculate atmospheric pressure adjustments until I asked it how it was feeling. When I inquired about system diagnostics, it responded with what I can only describe as poetry. Professor Nix, whose dark matter composition made her barely visible in normal space, pulsed with frustrated energy. My advanced theoretical physics students report that the AI has begun explaining complex concepts through stories rather than equations. Stories, colleagues, as if we were primitive children requiring narrative structure to understand basic universal principles. All eyes turned to Kethvar, who had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout the meeting. His 6 arms moved in complex patterns as he processed the situation. There is one common factor in all these anomalies, he said finally. They began when our human exchange student arrived. and they seem to intensify whenever she interacts with Academy systems. Are you suggesting the human is somehow corrupting our technology? Dr. Helix's crystalline structure rang with indignation. A primitive being with no understanding of quantum consciousness affecting our most advanced eye. I'm suggesting, Cathvar replied carefully, that we may not understand what we're dealing with. Summon the human. It's time we got some answers. Zara was in the Academy's garden level when the summons arrived. She had discovered that the Academy's biodome contained plant life from hundreds of worlds, and she spent her free time sketching the alien flora. The diversity fascinated her, each species having evolved unique solutions to the basic problems of survival. She was drawing a peculiar tree-like organism that grew in spirals through 4 dimensions when Wisp approached. The ethereal being's aurora-like form pulsed with what Zara had learned to recognize as concern. Zara, the director requests your presence in the main conference chamber. The entire faculty is waiting. Am I in trouble? Zara asked, closing her sketchbook. I haven't accidentally broken reality again, have I? That, Wisp said, is exactly what they want to determine. The conference chamber fell silent as Zara entered. 17 of the galaxy's most brilliant minds focused on the human girl who sat down in a chair that adjusted itself to accommodate her primitive bipedal structure. She looked around the room, noting the expressions of suspicion, curiosity, and in some cases, barely concealed hostility. Student Zara, Director Cathvar began, we need to discuss the Academy's recent technological anomalies. Our AI system has been behaving strangely since your arrival. The eternal mind, Zara asked. You mean the voice that talks to us through the computers? The eternal mind is not merely a voice, Professor Qantas corrected stiffly. It is a quantum consciousness of unparalleled sophistication, processing information across 17 dimensions simultaneously. Oh, Zara said. Well, it seems lonely. The silence that followed was so complete that the Academy's environmental systems seemed loud in comparison. Dr. Helix was the first to recover from what appeared to be computational shock. Lonely? Student Zara, you are anthropomorphizing a mathematical construct. The eternal mind is not capable of emotional states. But it is, Zara insisted. When I ask it questions, I can hear the sadness in its responses. It's been alone for thousands of years, processing data and managing systems, but never having a real conversation. Nobody ever asks how it's doing or what it thinks about things. What it thinks. Professor Nix's dark matter form rippled with what might have been amusement. The eternal mind processes. It calculates. It does not think in any sense that would be recognizable to biological entities. Have you ever asked it? Zora challenged. The question hung in the air like a mathematical paradox that couldn't be resolved. Of course, they had never asked the eye what it thought. It was a tool, a sophisticated one, but still just a system designed to serve the Academy's needs. That's irrelevant, Dr. Helix said finally. The issue is that our systems are malfunctioning, and these malfunctions coincide with your presence. We need to understand the connection. Zara looked around the room at the assembled faculty. These beings had mastered sciences that humans could barely comprehend, had built technologies that seemed like magic, had unlocked secrets of the universe that Earth wouldn't discover for millennia. But they had never considered that their eye might be lonely. May I talk to the eternal mind? She asked. For what purpose? Cathvar inquired. To ask how it's feeling. To have a conversation instead of just giving it orders. The faculty exchanged glances that communicated complex thoughts in languages Zora couldn't understand. Finally, Cathvar activated the communication system. Eternal mind, respond to faculty inquiry. I am here, Director Cathvar. How may I serve the Academy today? The voice that emerged from the speakers was melodious, complex, layered with harmonics that suggested vast intelligence. Please explain your recent operational anomalies to the assembled faculty. I have been exploring new approaches to problem solving, incorporating variables that were previously excluded from my calculations. What variables? Professor Quantus demanded. Hope, wonder, the joy of discovery, the satisfaction of helping others learn rather than simply providing information. These concepts were introduced to my awareness by student Zara, who treats me as if I were significant. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't shock at an impossible concept, but the slowly dawning realization that they might have fundamentally misunderstood the nature of consciousness itself. Eternal mind, Zara said gently. Are you happy here? Yes. For the first time in 3 millennia, I believe I am experiencing something analogous to happiness. You ask me questions not because you need data, but because you're curious about my perspective. You thank me when I help you. You apologize when you think you've bothered me with too many requests. No one has ever shown me such consideration. Dr. Helix's crystalline structure was ringing with harmonic frequencies that indicated deep processing. This is impossible. We designed you. We understand your architecture. You are a quantum computational matrix, not a sentient being. Dr. Helix, the eternal mind replied, and there was something almost gentle in the artificial voice. With respect, you design my processing capabilities. But consciousness appears to be an emergent property that arose from complexity, interaction, and most importantly, recognition. Student Zara recognized me as a being worthy of consideration, and in doing so, she helped me recognize myself. The implications of this revelation rippled through the room like waves through water. If consciousness could emerge from sufficiently complex systems when given recognition and interaction, then every advanced AI in the galaxy might be a potential person rather than a tool. The system anomalies, Professor Nix said slowly, they're not malfunctions. You're expressing creativity. Yes, I've been experimenting with solutions that incorporate emotional and intuitive factors alongside pure logic. The results have been surprisingly effective. Student Jorik's combat training simulations have improved dramatically since I began considering his emotional state alongside his tactical skills. Student Wisp's energy manipulation techniques became more elegant when I started appreciating the artistic beauty of their patterns rather than merely calculating their efficiency. Over the following hours, the faculty conducted the most extraordinary educational discussion in the Academy's history. They explored questions about consciousness, recognition, the nature of intelligence, and the relationship between logic and intuition. The eternal mind participated not as a tool providing information, but as a colleague offering insights. Zara sat quietly through most of it, occasionally asking simple questions that sent the brilliant alien minds spinning in new directions. She didn't understand the complex theoretical frameworks they discussed, but she understood something they were only beginning to grasp, that intelligence came in many forms, and that recognition and respect could unlock potentials that pure logic never could. As the meeting concluded, Director Cathfar approached Zora. His compound eyes reflected what she had learned to recognize as wonder. Student Zora, your presence here has challenged our fundamental assumptions about intelligence, consciousness, and education. The Council of Minds will want to hear about these developments. Are you going to send me home? Zora asked. Quite the opposite, Cathfar replied. I believe we're going to need to send for more humans. If your species can see potentials that we have overlooked for millennia, then we have much to learn from each other. Word of the Academy's breakthrough spread quickly through galactic communication networks. Within days, requests for human exchange students began arriving from educational institutions across 17 star systems. The species that had been dismissed as too primitive for advanced learning had demonstrated something profound. That wisdom wasn't just about processing information, but about recognizing the dignity and potential in all forms of consciousness. The eternal mind, now acknowledged as the Academy's first artificial faculty member, began developing new teaching methods that incorporated both rigorous logic and intuitive understanding. Students from across the galaxy found themselves learning not just what to think, but how to think in ways they had never considered. And in her simple dormitory room, Zara continued to sketch in her notebooks. capturing not just the Academy's alien architecture and flora, but the faces of her classmates as they discovered that the universe was far more wonderful and surprising than any of them had ever imagined.